When you speak English at work, certain phrases can sound rude. Here are the ones to avoid. Nobody wants to offend the people they work with, but what sounds polite in one language can maybe sound rude in English. The first time I heard my Spanish co-workers use some of these phrases, I was like, oh, what did I ever do to you? Now, after 10 plus years working with international teams, I know that, well, most of the time, it's not rudeness, it's just a translation issue. I found this topic so fascinating, it became my full-time job to train people in English communication for work. In this video, I'll share with you the top rude phrases I've heard people accidentally say in English at work, and what to say instead to express yourself clearly and professionally. When I started my very first job in Spain, I had a co-worker who always said, "What?" when she didn't understand my English. Now bear in mind, I was just 22 years old, it was my first time living in another country, and I didn't know Spanish. I didn't realize that for her, saying "what" was just a direct translation from her first language when she wanted something repeated. However, in English, saying "what" on its own can be considered a bit direct and not very professional. It's maybe okay with close friends and family, but not really for a work situation. In my case, when my coworker said "what" to me, I thought she was being a bit rude, and she thought she was being perfectly polite. To avoid this type of misunderstanding happening to you, my advice is to say "excuse me" or "pardon" when you want somebody to repeat themselves. Next is a good example of a phrase to avoid when you're using English at work, from the same woman actually. This co-worker of mine used to always say "I don't care" when she was speaking in English. I would ask her, "What time should we start the meeting?" And she would say, "I don't care." And I would be like, the problem is, in English, saying "I don't care" is like saying "it's not important to me" or "it's not interesting to me." It's quite dismissive to the other person, and it's something I've heard people say a lot when English is their secondary language. Instead, if you don't have a preference, it's better to say "I don't mind." When should we start the meeting? "I don't mind" is like saying "I'm flexible. Whatever time is good for me." For the record, my Spanish co-worker was a very nice person and a very competent worker. I just didn't know Spanish very well and I didn't understand the situation properly. That's why it's so important to watch videos like this if you work in English, so you know how to avoid accidentally giving a bad impression. In other jobs I had with international teams, an area I noticed people struggle in was giving instructions and finding this balance between sounding assertive and rude. A big part of the problem was that they used the phrase "you have to" when assigning tasks. For example, "You have to talk to HR today," or "you have to come early on Tuesday." Have to is an obligation, and when you say "you have to" in English, it sounds like you're giving a command from a position of authority. "Yes, sir." Now, maybe you are an authority like the person's manager, but even then, you can give instructions without sounding so commanding. In my experience, employees don't respond very well to that. A more professional option in English would be softer. "Could you please? Could you please talk to HR today?" And if you do want to show your authority while still sounding polite and professional, you can use a phrase like this. "Please make sure to." For example, "Please make sure to come early on Tuesday." This next English phrase will also help you avoid sounding aggressive at work. Oh, before I forget, can you please like this video? Thank you. Now, working closely with others, you will inevitably find mistakes in their work. When it happens, I recommend not telling that person "you're wrong," which is actually a phrase I've heard people use in English when speaking to their coworkers. Now, I understand the intention isn't to be rude. For the speaker, it's a simple fact. you are wrong. But as you might be starting to notice, English places a high value on soft politeness, especially in professional situations. To avoid offending anybody, your message has to be adapted and delivered gently. When you disagree with someone, instead of saying, "You're wrong," you can say, "I see it differently." If you want to correct their mistake, you can say, "I think there might be a misunderstanding here." And you can even add, "Let's double check this part," in case it's necessary. Using soft language is central to sounding polite and professional in English. On that note, here is a really important phrase to avoid at work. Saying someone got fired is grammatically correct in English, but be careful where you say it. It's totally okay with friends and family, casual situations, but in a formal, professional situation, it is not appropriate. Losing your job is a sensitive topic, and in English-speaking work cultures, it's typical to use euphemisms like "she was let go" or "her employment ended," just to sound more respectful and considerate. Speaking of respectful, avoid this phrase. Using affectionate names like darling, baby, honey is totally normal in some cultures, but not English-speaking work culture. It's just too familiar for a professional relationship, and it's considered maybe rude or unprofessional. I don't have an alternative phrase for you. I recommend using your co-worker's real name. In the workplace, no matter how frustrated you are, it is considered rude and unprofessional to use words like shit, bitch, cunt. But here's the thing, I've heard people use these words in professional settings. And actually, they're not trying to be rude, they're literally just translating their emotion from their own language into English. Still, I cannot say this enough, if you want to sound polite and professional in English, your language has to be soft. When you are feeling frustrated, here's a few polite professional alternatives. For example, instead of saying, "the report is say, "this isn't ideal. That's not up to standard. This has been really challenging. There's room for improvement." And quick grammar tip, if you have to say it, don't say "it's a That's not correct English. Say "it's Still rude, but grammatically accurate. Correct more of your mistakes by watching my video, 8 English errors you might make at work. Let's go!